And this issue is something that we are discussing on today at the eve of the um, mental health month of May. We want to make sure that we'll deal with this subject because it's something that is, for the last 5 years or so, has kind of risen inside of our community, and that's the issue of suicide and those thoughts that seem to be is running along into our community. So it's no, I know it used to be a time where we would say this is not part of our community. This is not something that we're dealing with. But here lately, we're finding that it's plaguing our community like it's plaguing other communities. So it's time for us to deal with those aspects. And so we do have our co-hosts as well as others who are going to be sharing knowledge with us on today in regards to this issue. And hopefully that this will help you and others that you know to kind of navigate through these difficult waters, especially in lieu of the things that we dealt with and saw this week, as well as the certain things we saw this month dealing with our young people when it comes to mental health and wellness. So with that said, I'm going to ask for Stephanie to go ahead and introduce herself and tell us a little bit about yourself. And we're going to go around the table here and let everyone introduce themselves and tell us about yourself and your expertise. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Julian. Thank you for being with us and setting everything up. My name is Stephanie Lyons. I am a mental health advocate and voice of the BBFG. We are just wanting to shine a light, like you said, in this month on this issue that has risen dramatically. As we saw in, I believe it was February when Miss USA, she committed suicide. And then recently, maybe about 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a young lady in Louisiana that did the same thing. So we are just wanting to hear the cry and answer the call. Katrina?
Hello, my name is Katrina Landry. I am the owner of Renewed Hope Counseling Center, where we work with adults and couples. And I'm just happy to be here and offer any insight that I can on this topic.
Sebastian.
Sebastian Moore, owner and operator of Parks to Purpose Concierge Therapy, which we discussed offers about better intervention and prevention programming for those court-mandated scenarios with domestic violence included, servicing primarily Richmond, Katy, Rosenberg area, but also offers, as we stated before, the concierge option and the telehealth option.
And Andrew.
Good afternoon, everyone. Andrew Landry. I am the CEO and founder of Where Men Hurt. Where Men Hurt is a nonprofit organization designed to give men a platform to talk about real life issues in a safe, non-judgmental setting. We currently meet on Monday nights. Men come in and talk about real life issues. Happy to be here.
Thank you for that. Julian, you want to go ahead and get started?
Certainly. We want to deal with this aspect, and we do have a few things we want to discuss. We know that we won't be able to delve into it all today, but we do hope that it can be something that will at least spark and or continue the conversation, and also present some tools that will help guide through these issues. So I want to kind of ask around and ask the question, we deal with suicide and also depression. I would like to know from your experience, from you all's experiences, what are some tell signs or precursors to kind of discover with certain people within themselves or others that how they can tell people actually having suicidal thoughts or issues or depressing thoughts or whatever. How is this recognized, first off?
And one thing, if you guys can also add, because we're speaking specifically to our community, does it look differently or sound differently in our community?
Right.
I guess I'll start. I think the second question that you asked is worth addressing as far as whether it looks differently. I would personally say in my experience that it does look very different. There's much more of a dismissiveness of the struggles that are present within our own community. So you'll hear more of it's all fine when you may know that there's a situation at hand, there are things that are legitimate stressors but to minimize those things consistently, despite the growth of the stressor, a lot of times that's a good indicator that a person is heading down the wrong path, and they very well maybe find themselves in a dangerous situation in the future, especially if you're offering support and intervention and they're dismissing that as well. I also have found that when that dismissiveness becomes aggressive, when they get angry about your attempts to be supportive, then that's an indicator that things are heading in the wrong
So like if they're, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. So for instance, like if we have someone that's saying, well, you know, I'm good, it's all good. I told you, girl, it's fine, I'm fine. And then they start to get angry. Is that kind of what you're saying, or what, like, okay.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what I'm saying. You guys have you guys had a different experience?
I think what I would probably say with clients or with people that maybe I come in contact with, because our culture tends to be more isolated.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, if we would say, hey, we can look for people to maybe withdraw, or that maybe you see them losing interest in things, right? Those could be other things, but you may want to look at maybe, are we eating differently, good or bad, right? Are we eating differently? Are we sleeping differently? But I think often in our culture, because we do internalize a lot, that when what we may think as isolation or withdrawal is their norm, right? And so it would be harder to kind of gauge that. And then I'm gonna go kind of out and generalize. Guys, definitely change it. Let me know if it's different. But I would also venture to say, even more so for Black males, the internalization is much greater. And so it's much more difficult to try to have those kind of conversations, because, you know, we've talked before about these stereotypes, or that these perceptions that we're supposed to have of this strong Black, whatever, female or male, that we're not discussing these things. And so it becomes much more difficult. And we usually don't see that until it's already up at this space, because these other stages that we may think that we see, either A, they're not receptive to it yet because it's still, you know, I'm holding on to this perception of what I'm supposed to be, or B, we're just totally missing it because this is just what we do as a culture. We don't talk about it. We like to say, you know, again, with this whole strong Black whatever, it's this, you'll be fine, right? So even if someone does come and communicate, this is a lot going on, you know, or this is a lot, you know, we're not saying, how can I help you? What are some areas that you need? You know, we're not doing that. We're just saying, oh, you got this, you're good, you know. And I said, well, what happens if you don't got it?
Right.
Then,
or take it to God.
Just pray about it. Communicated, you're supposed to get it. And so I think just that part in and of itself makes it much more difficult for us to manage it within our own culture.
So does it always begin with depression? Is depression the precursor, or can it begin some other way?
I don't think it's just that. I think you can look at it from trauma. Trauma can sometimes cause that. Grief, which can have a form of depression with that. But I mean, I think if you're saying just depression alone would be the thing that causes that, no, not necessarily. You can have other mental health issues, like, you know, sometimes people have it with bipolar, even if you have anxiety, right? Sometimes if we have such an acute anxiety, we could end up having, most of the time it becomes this part of, I don't know what else to do with whatever I'm feeling. And so this tends to be what's the only other thing that I can think of, because I've been trying to deal with this for X amount of time. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's just restricted to depression. I think there's other elements that can bring about that. But that's what I'd say. It's not just that. I think we're used to linking the two together, but it's not restricted to.
I would like to know how and I also would like for Andrew to chime in on this too, in regards to how the men and dealing with how the men have reacted to this. But how early on have you seen these types of thoughts and ideas when it comes to either depression or trauma or whatever, even if it's something that's maybe inherited or whatever. How early on have you seen this as far as ages are concerned, when these issues and problems, how it's affecting them, different people?
Well, I think I'll piggyback a little bit off of what the Dr. Landry said. I think it really boils down to a loss of hope is kind of the first step that starts in my opinion, to start driving people into the depressive state. The issue, along with what she said, is that it's a silent killer, because we as men we're already to ourselves. We already don't trust people. We already don't, talk about our day. So we're bottling all of this up, and then it gets to a place where I have nothing else to do. I don't have another alternative. And that loss of hope is really what drives it. Typically, with the guys that I see, it typically comes from a loss. Whether it's a relationship, whether it's a parent, whatever it is, it comes from that initial loss and not knowing how to cope with or how to deal with that loss. And that's the thing that starts the spiral for most men that I have seen.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Sebastian, you want to piggyback on that?
That was dead on. Loss is a big piece of it, or the fear of loss, or the fear of, or the feeling of helplessness. And he used the word hope, and I think that's a good word. Helplessness is another word we could use. So complex trauma is kind of one of those things where life just keeps happening and things keep happening and they're beyond your control. And, that kind of thing piles up over time. My dog died, my mama sick, my best friend left, my girl left me, I lost my job, like all of that kind of stuff over time. If you don't have the skills, you don't have the wherewithal to reach out for support, then yeah, it's a loss of hope, it's a helplessness. I don't know what I can do to feel better, because all these things are happening that are beyond my control. So how can I escape the feeling? And that phrasing is something that you would hear, some version of that quite often. How do I escape these feelings? And that's part of why it's become a thing, right? A bigger thing. And I think another one is just exposure. The more we talk about these things and attempt to educate, there are people who are not strong in the sense that they take it as an option and as a resource, that they look at it as a solution. Okay, well, that's something I hadn't thought of. I can use that, versus saying, okay, that's something to be wary of. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like the more we discuss certain things, they tend to spike because they become an option, an unfortunate option. Hopefully that translates.
I was going to say, to kind of touch on Julian's question about the age part. I had a conversation with one of my clients, and we were talking about they have school age children, and this was like first session in the morning after the stuff that happened in Uvalde, and it was, I'm scared to bring my kids to school. I told them they can stay home, So I think the other part is that we have to be, I don't see kids, so I can't say that that's my normal niche that I see. What I will say is, I think as a whole, our children are exposed to much more than maybe we were, and they have times are very, very different. When we went to school, we weren't worried about someone coming up here shooting. We was fighting, or that was it. Like we didn't have some of these other, fearful things that happen. Then, bullying was very different than it was back in the day. So you have other components where self-esteem issues that can kick in with younger kids. We have difficulty with feeling like you're fitting in, and then we're not even going to add into family dynamics to cause issues, right? So if we haven't healed from a family, we got those. Now we got kids in school, and then we have the environmental factors that are kicking in. So I'm not surprised that we would have more mental health concerns with our children at a younger age. I think where we have to really work on it is for parents to really be able to, parents, aunts and uncles, whoever, that they are really providing these tools for these kids to have this space to be able to navigate it. Because I think, again, they just need one, right? They just need one person that's going to give them an option that's different than how they're feeling in that moment. And so, there's been multiple people that I can think about who in those moments, they just needed somebody to hear them, validate them, and then be able to journey with them, help them when they're feeling that way, and then start developing this self-love that they can have. And so I think that when we're talking about age, unfortunately, it's getting younger and younger because of so much stuff that they're exposed to and they're experiencing.
And I love what you said about it just takes one person to give them another option. I think we have to learn to be responsible for each other. This mindset that it's none of my business, it's not my child, it's just not going to work. It's not working. It hadn't been working for ages. And I know that, as Julian said before, typically in the past, we would say, this is not something that we deal with in our community. And I was actually speaking with a long-term, he's been working in the service for the police department for about 25 to 30 years, I believe. I know him, I see him at work all the time. He's been in some high profile murder cases and on the news. And I was talking to him, he's an officer. And he said, and I asked him that question. I said, we tend to think it's not us, it's other communities. He said, 25 years ago, I probably would have said, yes, you're right. He said, but in the last 5 years, we've seen it spike out of control. We got a problem. And we can't just leave kids in their room, leave them in front of the boob tube. You can't just give them a video. You can't just dismiss them. People are dying. And we got to do something about it. It's not just even people, it's the babies.
Mm.
But, if as parents, whether we're busy working or maybe we don't have the same communication skills to be able to communicate and help our children emote, sometimes and again, we'll go back to cultural, right? What goes on in this house stays in this house. We have those colloquialisms that we use. And so then, of course, years before we followed that, right? We're not talking about nothing. But I think as time goes on, and kind of to Sebastian's point, because we're starting to normalize mental health and it's not seen as bad as maybe we had seen it before, it starts to become more normalized. Now I'm going to say, sometimes we just misuse the terms, but we're not gonna talk about that. But I will say that because that becomes more normalized, now we're starting to see people communicate more, right? And I will say this, and this is not gonna be a knock on any parent. This is to say that sometimes our children aren't gonna talk to us, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to talk to someone else, whether it's a therapist, whether it's an aunt, whether it's an uncle, so I think that's why when we really talk about this village to raise our children, that's really what it's about. Because as much as you can have a great relationship with your child, sometimes they're just not going to share it with parent, right? Even if they, whether they had a good relationship or they don't. And so that's where I think it's important that you have this village that if they're not comfortable sharing it with you, they have someone, and that's that one person, right? It's whoever it is. And so that may be where that person checks in with their parent and let them know what's going on. Mm-hmm. It may be the therapist, right? If a kid is saying, I'm feeling X, Y, and Z, parents, you got to be able to hear it, right? And this is from the therapist kind of fussing. It doesn't matter what the cost is because your child's life is at stake, right? And so if we can spend money on all these other things, find something that's going to take your insurance. There are low cost therapists available. But if your children are telling you I'm feeling X, Y, and Z, it is not the time to be dismissive of it. You'd rather caution on the side of let's process this and have you have a safe space to deal with it than to say, oh, you'll just be okay.
And there's something, I'm sorry, go ahead, Sebastian.
Yeah, she's bringing up some valid points and it's taking me down a different path to share. One of the things from a parenting standpoint that that has become more commonplace in line with what happens in this house stays in this house is the line between advocating and enabling our children. And a lot of times when we're advocating based on their emotional response, we're isolating the village. And so, your kid says, this teacher doesn't like me or that adult, whatever the situation is. And we kind of immediately go into defense mode and protecting our child against this person, and sometimes not always filtering their intent, you know? And so you kind of put them in their place as it relates to your child. And in doing that, you've kind of cut off one additional person that could have been support to your child, you know, to have impact with your child had you been supportive of the whole of the situation. You know, hey, what was happening in that moment? Hey, let's talk to that adult. You know, maybe they didn't mean it that way, you know, and have those kind of conversations so that maybe, and maybe anybody who's worked with kids, I know that I've had experience where on the other side of that moment, that relationship with that child and that adult that they originally had issue with becomes one of a confidant.
Mhm.
And so we short circuit so many of those opportunities that the only person that they do have is us. And to her point, if they decide that they're not talking to us and we've cut off the village in the name of advocacy, then they're left with what you were saying, Stephanie, earlier. They're left with my online friends, my online resources. And now we're kind of in this space where it's the blind leading the blind. You know, I'm telling you what makes sense to me because I'm also 12, 16, 20. You know, and the wisdom that comes from life experience or professional insight, whatever that is, we miss out on that. And so now we're feeding these negative emotions in an attempt to be supportive.
Mhm. I love that.
I think
Excellent point.
I think that it brings up the mindset of us trying. We need to approach more things with more objectivity, because as a parent, we know that if something happens to our child or someone says something to our child, it's real easy to get defensive. You know, you say this to my child, you say this to my baby, you know, and especially when it's a teacher, you know, I don't want my child to have to go to school and deal with this teacher who was expressing themselves in a certain way I don't approve of. But instead of us automatically getting defensive, we have to take that extra step of being objective and say, let's talk to the teacher, let's call the teacher in, if we have a meeting, bring all parties in to talk about it, see what happened, what was said, what was done, how can we move forward from here? Because I think we have to reintroduce the village that way in order to for people to see that, hey, we're in this with you, we're in this together. So now, as a parent, as a teacher, you know, we can be a team with the child, but and that goes for not just that, but a whole lot of other things. It deals with our family, our neighborhoods, and stuff like that. If we could get ourselves to be more objective in how to approach people, even in the middle of conflict, that would invite that village back. So I'm thinking.
I love it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm co-signing. That's exactly the point. We do definitely have to reintroduce the village, and this is not to say that you should not advocate for your child, and it's not to say that you should let people, because there are people out there who don't have good intentions, and there are people who are wrong. But when we default to their error and they've wronged my child or they've wronged my friend or whatever it is, my best friend, we're adults and that job didn't deserve you anyway. Like all of those things that we're again trying to be supportive of does not, one, help our friend, help our child learn accountability.
And it's
right. And the result of that is I don't feel the emotional maturity. That doesn't happen. I don't learn how to work through things because now I feel like a target. I don't recognize that I contributed to it in some small way or a large way. And by me contributing to it, then I also have power to change the situation. But
and you become a victim. It helps the kids become victim.
I become a victim because I don't have any power in the situation. They're out to get me, whether it be the school or the friend or the job or the situation. So what am I supposed to do when everybody's out to get me?
Or when everyone is pulling on me for something, because I keep thinking about the young lady at LSU who took her life, and I know Stephanie and I have talked about this a little bit, but you know, when I read her letter that she wrote, it was heart wrenching because she was listing out things that she had to deal with, listing out the things that she had to cope with, and she pulled out her mom, said about, sorry mom, sorry to my grandparents, and all this type of things. And we go back to saying, if somebody would have been able to talk to her in that moment, share in that moment, where was her village? Where was the people who could have said something? And I know that we always look at things hindsight, like, well, if I would have said something to my loved one, maybe if I would have said something, or I would have known, I could have said something to my friend, so they wouldn't have happened, or my daughter, son, however it is, would not have happened. And so, in asking that question, I kind of want to shift and ask the question now: what do we do? What can we present? What can we give? What can we share? What tools can we present to those who are dealing with these thoughts, or know someone who's dealing with these thoughts, to give them what they need in order to help overcome some of these things? Because we're going to continue to hear about this, but what needs to be also normalized is to continue to hear about that, how they can get help and where they can get help from. So what are more tools that we can use, and things that we can say, or what we can offer to help in this situation?
And before you guys answer that, on the back of that, is it just kind of like, so with Miss America, she said in a statement that she longed for death. A lot of people long for peace. They find it in death, or think they can find it in death, but what they really want is peace. So if you have someone who's adamant about it, because like you said, even with the letter, she wrote the letter, she made some statements about how she knew her mother would do anything for her. So it sounds like she had some resources, but if someone is in that mind state, is it just hopeless? If they want to do it, is it just going to happen? Again, like Miss America, she had longed for death. So I don't want to make it sound hopeless, but just to kind of coin a phrase, people are going to do what they want to do. Is that kind of, or where's the line? I don't know if the therapist and Andrew, if you guys can help us out. And then is it different according to age? You know what I'm saying? Do people kind of grow out of it?
Yeah, I have thoughts. Do you guys have thoughts?
I'll go first. I think in every situation there is something greater, and until they find that greater, the thing that's at the top of their list will be the thing. So if she longed for death and that was her greater, then there's nothing else that anybody can do, because that was her goal. It's a bad way to say it, but that's really what it was. So I think even when you talk about with the youth, it is, we as parents, we have to evolve. Most kids are not saying, hey, I'm going to kill myself. It is the signs that they present, or the verbiage that they use, that allows us to be able to hear those concerns. But personally, like, I'm not really good at hearing feelings, right? So if you feel a certain way, then because as a parent, if I haven't evolved, then I'm expressing to you the response that my parents gave me. And so it becomes a cycle of running into the same thing over and over again.
That was good, Andrew. Thank you for that. Sebastian, you were going to say?
Well, I don't want to follow him. That's not fair.
Katrina?
Hey, wow. I'm just kidding.
Mrs.
I'm going to kind of come from two spaces. One, from this village part, and for people who, hear what they're saying and hear what they're not saying. And I say that because that sometimes, kind of piggybacking off of what Andrew was saying, sometimes it's what they're not saying that we need to be able to hear. And I think with that, it also, how are we pressuring our children? I know I grew up and I wasn't allowed to have C's. Like that wasn't even allowed in our house, right? And for me, I was like, this is a hard subject. I worked really, really hard at this, right? And it was like, nope, too bad, can't have C's. So I'm saying is that sometimes what pressures are we putting on our children? How do we balance this? Yes, I want you to be excellent and I understand that you're intelligent and you can do this, versus let's put all this pressure on them. Or whether it's these kids that are like, I'm going to graduate from high school with a degree, you know, like it's understanding what are we doing, what stressors our children are having and how can we navigate that, right? And so one, are we hearing them and are we hearing what they're not saying? Two, I think for some, if we were to look at some of like, when we actually start talking about mental illness, now we start looking at maybe some chemical imbalances and changes that are going on. And so when we're talking about something more like longing for, and we haven't found any particular thing that's, I call them like the trigger part, right? If there wasn't anything particular, like there wasn't any trauma that happened, there wasn't, if you can't pinpoint it to stressors that you've had in life, if you're just saying, hey, I just at some point I just started feeling some kind of way and I felt like this since I was in middle school, but I didn't really know what this meant, and so we've kind of just navigated that through our whole life. Now we're dealing more with like chemical imbalances, and so medication is important. And I think that sometimes we don't like that phrase, but I think at the end of the day, if we had blood pressure, we had cholesterol, we got diabetes, we're going to go get some medication for that, right? But we're not going to acknowledge that mental illness does have some kind of chemical imbalance that happens. We can have traits that can cause us to be more prone to alcoholism than others, right? So understanding that part. And so if we can't really pinpoint any particular thing that's drawing us to feel this particular way, we're probably going to need to look at the sense of saying, you know, do we have some chemical imbalances? Do we have bipolar? Do we have depression? You know, have we suffered any particular brain trauma? Things like that, to where it's maybe causing some changes and we may need to be on some medication to help with additional coping skills, right? And so I think that that part sometimes we don't want to talk about, but I think it's important to address.
Well, Dr. Landry, I would like to piggyback on something, or ask a question actually about what you said earlier, just now rather. You said that we also need to listen to something that they don't say. Can you dig into that a little bit more? What would that look like in a case in point of a child or a loved one? What would it look like? What are they not saying?
So let's say that so I always use my niece because that's my baby. So if I'm talking to her and I'm listening to her and she's talking about all these things that are going on in her life, right? Maybe she's got kids that are stressful, maybe her, you know, significant other is stressful, and I'm just hearing her talk about just stress in general. What I'm also trying to check in is, how are you handling it? How is this impacting you? Because if you're not talking to me about that, I'm going to also check in, where's your hope at? Where are you willing to, like, what are you doing to make some adjustments, right? And if we're hearing someone in the same space over and over again, we probably need to check in, right? Flip side, also, if we know that that they're doing a lot and you ask them and their response is, I'm okay, probably still need to check in, right? Because again, we go back to cultural is, I'm good. I think my husband and I have this conversation. I said, you know, for years, since I've been grown up, it's been Katrina's got it, right? And I said, well, what happens if I don't got it? And he was, well, you know, you got to be able to be vulnerable. Like, this is what you show to people. And I said, but if I was vulnerable, could you take it, right? Like, if I broke, could you deal with me being broken, right? And I think that that's the other space, is that if for some of us, we've had this whole part, okay, babe. For some people who have this whole part of, I gotta have it together, then sometimes what we're not doing is we're not saying it's okay for you not to have it together. And that's the part where I'm saying also be mindful of what you're not hearing, because I could go days and days and days and days and days with a whole bunch of stuff going on. And then there may be a day where I told him, I said, look, I don't want to talk to nobody, right? But if he's not checking in on me, and if I can't have and I don't have a vulnerable space, then that's all I know to do. And at some point, someone's going to break. So part of hearing what they're not saying is also taking inventory of what they have going on, and then realizing it's okay that you don't have to be okay all the time. It is, I've told some clients, if all you want to do is cry this whole session, you can do that, because that's maybe the only time that they do it.
So would you agree though, Katrina, that, so do you have to really know a person's pattern of behavior to be able to recognize when it's off? Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's in my head, you have to have people paying attention to what's regular to know when it's off. Does that make sense? And like Andrew was saying, he doesn't read those emotional cues. He's not good at doing that. So what about the people that don't have, but there are plenty of people that don't. So what about people that don't have someone that pays attention on a regular, kind of like, unfortunately, the shooter in Uvalde, his dad said he never talked, or his grandfather said he never talked. What do you do with that? I mean, like, I think eventually people just kind of, you want to be dismissed, you don't want to talk, people just kind of take it and say, okay, that's what they want, and just let it go,
But
so
you got to be intentional.
As to how to treat
you have to be intentional. So our youngest one, he's like his dad, he's not a talker, right? And literally every day he'd come home from school, how was your day? And it would be the same response, good. And I'd say, what was good about it? Like, if I'm going to have to ask 21 questions, then I'm asking 21 questions because I want to know what's going on, right? Now, it still doesn't mean he's going to tell me everything, but I'm going to have some kind of insight about what's going on. I'm asking you who your friends are. I'm asking you what you're doing. So I'm asking those kinds of questions, right? I think the thing becomes, this goes back to this whole village. At some point, they've got to connect with somebody, right? Somebody, a teacher, a counselor at school. It could be a cousin that's older. It could be, my niece is like my baby. And if she doesn't have a good day, she is on the phone like, I'm not having it today, right? So you got to have someone. And if that also means that this person's just not talkative, because you got to know, some people are just not like that, right? But they're still, even in them not talking, you have to know when they're not talking even less. And I think that still goes to, we have to be intentional, and there's somebody who you have a relationship with. And I'm going to also preface this, that is not like you, right? Because let me just use the baby and my husband, for example. If both of them are not talkers, then they are both going to be just not talking, right? But if you have another person who's going to be in tune with them and say, and you also have empaths, right? Sometimes empaths just catch a whole bunch of stuff, then no one, are you good? Like, you all right? And so I think having some of those people in your lives or around your village, and it may be for parents to intentionally place people in their children's lives to help with that too, just because it's going to take more than one person. So I think it's a combination of a lot of different things. And I think we can come at it from a lot of different options. But did I answer your question?
You did. Sebastian, you want to say anything on that?
I want to kind of oversimplify it and call it creating expectations.
Okay.
And I say oversimplify it because all of what she said is all a part of it, right? But that's kind of coming with the grooming of whoever is in your village, whether it be your child or your friend. You have to create those expectations. Like, you have to understand that I'm not going to allow you to be in that space, and I not check in, and not to be forcible about it, but I am going to hold you accountable because this is outside of the norm. So I'm not going to say, okay, well, you say you got it, you got it. All right, fine. It's not that simple. Well, okay, you say you got it. However, and what you normally do when it's not what's happening right now. So like, what's really going on?
So one of the things I did with my kids, recently I had a talk with my youngest daughter about something she was going through. And I had to tell her, I'm not going to allow you to victimize yourself. Like, I see you going down this path. That's not what we're going to do. So like you said, actually having an expectation and not allowing people to do that, expecting better is a great thing. When they were teenagers, I refused to, when I come home, I go upstairs, because sometimes I think we can kind of get our kids in the everyday life. If they're upstairs and your bedroom is downstairs, you just don't want to go upstairs. So you kind of just let them eventually, they got one of everything upstairs. It's like their own little apartment and nobody checks in. Especially in their high school years, I made it a point to go upstairs after I got off of work each day, and I gave her 15 minutes of my undivided attention. Period. That's it. And she knew daily she had my attention for a good 15 minutes. Now, sometimes it would go longer than that, but that was my way of checking in. And yeah, no, I'm not going to live in some space where I don't know what's going on. So like you said, having an expectation and maybe setting aside some time specifically just for them may be the beginning of them feeling like, okay, and if it's 15 minutes and they don't want to say anything, I just lay with it on the bed. That's it, you know, so.
Yeah, and in creating that kind of expectation, you create for the other person. Well, I know if nothing else, such and such is going to come check on.
That part. And then with suicide, if you guys can answer this too, Julian, and maybe you can go somewhere with this. So we've been talking about kids, but like these are adults that have committed suicide recently in the community. So I have a friend named Carlos, and he hopefully will come on and be a special guest with us and share his story. One of the things that he mentioned was that we're not, so when it comes to suicide, we were saying that it wasn't something in the past that we would say was a part of our community. But one of the things that he mentioned is that we've assimilated to middle-class society. We're no longer segregated. You know, our stressors and are a lot different. And along with middle class and upper society comes some of the same stressors. Hence, we have we're now falling into some of the patterns that we thought that were only for other communities. Now they've become ours. So from an adult standpoint, be it male or female, can you guys shed some light on that? Like, we've inherited the money and the affluence, but we've also inherited this other stuff too.
Right. I think Brother Robinson was going to say something.
Well, I kind of want to combine a couple of things because I want to highlight again what you said about, you know, really giving and being intentional with giving your children time. It has to be intentional. So I don't want us to wasp over that because it's so important. And whoever's listening to this video needs to know you have to be intentional when it comes to giving your children time. Now, when it comes to the change from more of a lower class community to moving into middle class, and many in upper class community, we're starting to kind of inherit some of those same attributes. Well, it goes along with the mommy and daddy maybe not have enough time to raise you or spend time with you because they're doing other things. You're comparing the thought process of, well, they have the upstairs going on and we're downstairs doing whatever we're going to be doing. And so I think it's that distancing starts to get there, because now we don't at one time we only had one television, so everybody watched TV together. Now there's a television in every room. And we may have sat down to eat dinner together when we didn't have much, but now everybody has their own meal. Everybody DoorDashing their own separate meals, and so there's this separation of us because we become a more affluent society. We have means to separate ourselves, and so we have to be careful. And here comes that intentional thing. We have to be intentional about spending time. I say to my family, no matter what, we're going to sit down and eat together at the table with no television on at least once a week. We're going to make sure that we have that in place, because I need to know what's going on in your life. I need to know, talk to me, share with me. And I even went along to my wife, because again, as Dr. Landry was talking about, I asked my wife, "You okay?" I'm fine. I'm fine. And I see it all over your face that you're not okay. But then you're telling me you're okay. Again, going back to that intentional thing, there has to be a place for us to share, and we have to make sure that the things that we're attaining don't outweigh the love that we have for each other and the attention that we need from each other. We've been given these 5 senses by God, and all these 5 senses have to be cultivated. So that means I have to cut off some things that are tangible to me to deal with the intangible things that meet my own persona. Then I have to do that, but I can't go past the intentionality. That really stuck out with me, the intentionality.
And it's something that you say that because even though I did that with my daughter, I got that actually from a friend, and he actually, shout out to Lewis, I got this from you, Lewis Ware, but he actually mentioned that he does it with his wife. He does it daily because a lot of times, you know, as women, we're like, well, we don't get enough of your attention. You know, I want you to hear me. It's what we do. We communicate. That's the way we connect. And the way that he solved the discord, he said, I would intentionally come home and give her 15 minutes of my undivided attention. And I thought that was such a simple and magnificent solution. So it works for spouses as well as children. And that 15 minutes is gold. Like it could just solve a multitude of problems.
Yeah, because a lot of men, they to be honest, a lot of men do not want to hear about your day. Hate to say that.
Really, Julian?
I hate to put that out there, but a lot of men don't always want to hear about their wife's day. They want to come home and leave work at work and just do whatever and not concerned about that. But again, it goes back to that intention. You have to let this person get it out. Because my wife comes and tells me about her day, and I'm gonna be honest with you. Sometimes I'm like, okay, you know, but I realize that she needs to get that out. And who else is she going to talk to in-house but me? You know, who else does she have a chance to discuss the thing? And what I want to do, I want to start speaking to everyone else but me, and then our communication gets bad. Our communication, you know, so we have to allow those things to go and give that person time, because that's another way of showing love by doing that. So that's one to throw it out there. Husbands, give your wife some time. 15 minutes. 15. You got 15 minutes to 15, tell me about.
That's it. 15 minutes and we are good.
Yeah. I think it's important to zoom out and say that these strategies, as we're talking, we're saying, okay, this is kids, oh, this works for spouses. These are general principles that work, period. And it's not just for a particular title. And it might not be somebody that lives in your house. It could be your friend. And it might not be every day, but we're gonna, you know, brunch, you know, every other week, or I'm gonna call you and like, hey, tell me, or your mom, your grandfather, whoever it may be, I'm gonna call on the way home. That's our norm. So yeah, essentially what we're saying is we're creating outlets for the people who we care for, and we're making that the norm so that they aren't having to figure out whether or not this is the time and the person with whom I share my feelings and concerns. I already know the person, and I know that there will be a time. So here it is. And a lot of what happens, without trying to project on other folks, you know, you're kind of struggling with stuff internally. And maybe nobody understands it the way you would, because you have not seen them have the same experience. And because you don't think that they've had the same experience, why am I going to explain it to you? You're not going to get it. So this is how we eliminate that. I don't have to have the same experience. I am the person you check in with normally. You already know I'm not going to get it, but go ahead and say what you got to say. You know, and to be the person willing to give of yourself. Because like I talked about earlier, we're very willing to shut down and isolate and say one of the worst phrases ever, it is what it is, because that so easily minimizes my options, so easily minimizes the emotions I have attached to that particular situation, so it easily minimizes what I can do to get myself out of that situation, or to get the resources and use those resources to get out of that situation, right? So if I'm presenting like, hey, everything is what it is, and I have no one that I trust, then now I find myself in a space where I'm isolated, I'm feeling alone and lonely, and therefore now I have to find options to fix this situation. And to speak to that assimilation piece, now I've seen this as an option. Maybe I'll use that one.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, kind of to piggyback on what he was saying, and to talk about your statement about adults. You know, stressors are stressors, and whatever those stressors are for someone, it is. I'm not going to use your phrase. Whatever that stressor is a stressor for that particular person, right? And whether if it's a lower economic issue, that's a stressor. If it's a higher economic issue, maybe that's not the stressor, right? But maybe the stressor is we're in upper management and we're the only ones in upper management, and that's a different kind of stressor, right? So I think I think the issue isn't to necessarily just focus on if it's in a particular group or not. It's to be able to say, hey, look, this particular person, these are some struggles that they're having. What are tools that they need for this struggle, right? And I think, again, it goes back to, if you have those relationships, to Sebastian's point, that the relationship has been built over years, that when those things pop up, you're available. On the flip side, I will also say that we have to make sure that we are okay, right? That we're not pouring into someone else from our empty cup, and that we're not pouring into someone else from our unhealed places, right? And so I think that I tell all the supervisees, every good therapist has a therapist, right? We are still people, and we have our own things that we deal with. And so we need our own space to process and deal with our stuff, right? But what would I look like coming in and seeing someone back to back all day, every day, and I'm not living the life that I'm talking about, right? I'm not using the tools that we have, right? And so I think that it's very, and it's easier to develop those relationships when someone else can see you implementing them, because they look real, right? It's not that you're just telling me, we talked about this cliche, go pray about it, or just let it go, or just, it is what it is. But because they get to see it alive, then when they hear it from you, it sounds very different. It sounds doable, right? And I think that those things go back to, again, intentionality in relationships, but we've established those through the courses of time, and as opposed to it just being like, oh, it's the same thing with therapy, right? They're not just coming in therapists and just divulge any and everything. It takes time. It takes time for them to build that relationship. So I think relationships are important. And then we're just being geared towards whatever stressors they have, because they can change.
Beautiful. Julian, I think we're going to have to definitely have a part 2.
Yes, definitely. But I'm loving what you said. Every therapist needs a therapist. Every coach needs a coach. Every pastor needs a pastor. You need to have someone, again, you can communicate to and share with you. And let's normalize in our community that it's okay to talk to someone. Now, we still have a little bit of that to kind of work out a little bit. It's gotten better, but we still have some to work out. It's okay to go talk to someone, to weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, however schedule you have set. It's okay for you to talk to someone, and it should be something that we encourage.
And not just even okay, but let's make it cool. As a people, whatever we touch, it's automatically cool, right? That's how they market stuff. So let's make it cool. I think, shout out to Jay Barnett, E.T., and some of the others that make it cool to open up and talk. So let's do that too. Create it, around the lifestyle.
Yeah. Make it cool. That's I like that in our urban society. Because when we make it cool, everybody piggybacks off of us. Can I shout out our community like that? Can I say that about our community?
Yes, I love it.
Thinks it's cool. So yeah, I like that. All right. So I'm hearing this. Listen to what people say and what they don't say. We're hearing to be intentional about when it comes to communication, to show that love. It's also talking about self-care as well. Make sure that you take care of yourself. Make sure you're talking to someone and not just listening to everybody. They're just dumping on you. You don't have anyone to talk to as well. So we have these things. We get ready to walk away with a few tools. We still got a part 2, part 3, whatever we want to do from this point on. But I know we have to head out of here, but let's do some final thoughts before we bounce.
Sebastian?
Yeah.
I would say that it's not as silent as we thought it was. The signs are there, the people are talking. We just have to do a better job of listening.
Katrina?
I think that if we can just remember that we're in this together, good, bad, or not, that you do have options and resources. And I think it's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to not be okay forever.
Just want to, I guess for me, I just don't want people to make a long-term decision, for a short-term situation, give it another chance, give it another day.
Thank y'all so much. Do appreciate Andrew. He had to jump off. We thankful for him. I almost said thank God for him. I'm a pastor, so I'll say thank God for folks real quick. Grateful for Sebastian being here as well, and also Dr. Landry.
Yes.
Thank y'all so much for your insight. Stephanie, you're amazing and great, so we're grateful for you as well.
Thank you.
If I have a final thought, I want to say this: let's reintroduce the village. Let's reintroduce the village.
Very nice.
All right.
So we will see you guys in part 2. We'll continue the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Bye-bye.